Chapter 780, Rosefinch Sword. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Saint Lady had obviously researched Shaolin before and was very familiar with him. She knew he had poor character. If he became an heir, there was the risk that he could turn around and bite them. In Saint Lady's opinion, Lin Yue was the best candidate. He was gentle, just, intelligent, extraordinarily talented, and loyal. He would step out when needed and charge bravely. He also lay low and didn't want to compete with the outside world. Shaolin was nothing compared to Lin Yue. If he's already so disrespectful to me, wouldn't he be even more uncontrollable if he's allowed to become a saint? Saint Lady worked to push down her anger and remain calm. After all, Shaolin was now an heir and would become the Empress's disciple. Even though Saint Lady wanted to teach him a lesson, she couldn't do it. So obviously, she couldn't leave any traces either. Right now, she only hoped that Lin Yue would appear and take care of Shaolin. That way, she could use it as a chance to push Lin Yue into the heir position, replacing Shaolin. Lin Yue didn't want to become an heir, but the Saint Lady insisted on pushing him up from behind. Shaolin tossed down the copper wine cup and flew up from the cot. He used the 7-star diversion technique and appeared in the center of the white stone square. His red cape fluttered loudly behind him. He scanned the swordsman in all directions as if he was proudly observing the world. The sword technique conference this year doesn't have to be as troublesome as before, he announced. I will open up the challenge. Those from the Yin and Yang sect, the Chi sect, and 8 Trigram sect can challenge me at will. Then he continued, but let me first make it clear that injuries and deaths are inevitable in a sword challenge. If you can't take even one strike from me and die here, don't complain that I'm too cruel. Shaolin's voice traveled into everyone's ears. Hearing his words, no one thought he was being too arrogant. After all, he was one of the 9 heirs. He was obviously powerful and qualified to be so proud. The past Sword Emperor had been extremely proud too. He'd humiliated the prides from the Tai Kai sect and the other 3 major sects. No one thought he'd been arrogant. Instead, they were even more impressed. A saint swordsman from the moon worship demonic sect chuckled and said, Shaolin does have some characteristics of the past Sword Emperor. After the sword technique conference, his reputation will be greater than before. But a swordsman from the Ministry of War scoffed. The Sword Emperor's name is passed down through the ages because he's truly powerful and has never been defeated. Even though he's proud, he still knows the limit. Many people lost to him, but they all respect him. Shaolin is still too far from the Sword Emperor when he was young. He's just this arrogant because he drank from the holy spring. He's only a conceited junior. How can he be compared to the Sword Emperor? While everyone was discussing animatedly, Bu Chen of the 8 Trigram sect stepped out. He entered the battle ring of the conference. 8 Trigram sect, Bu Chen, here to experience junior brother apprentice Shaolin's techniques. Bu Chen carried an ancient sword on his back. He smiled and brought his hands up in greeting. Bu Chen and Shaolin had trained together in the Void World battleground. They had a good relationship and were comparable in skills. They dueled 3 times before. Bu Chen had lost once and won twice. Seeing Bu Chen's greeting, Shaolin kept his hands behind his back, looking arrogant. He smiled and said, Bu Chen, I'm an heir now. It's not very suitable for you to still call me junior brother apprentice, is it? Bu Chen frowned slightly. He immediately retracted his hands and shook his sleeves. Why? He asked. Soon, I will become the Empress's disciple. Are you purposefully trying to be connected to her by calling me junior brother apprentice? To be honest, we aren't that close, Shaolin said, sneering. The young swordsmen in the square all laughed mockingly. After hearing Shaolin's words, everyone guessed that they weren't actually that close. They felt that Bu Chen thought too highly of himself to call an heir his junior brother apprentice. Of course, others thought that there was nothing wrong with this title. After all, the 4 symbols and 8 Trigram sect were all branches of the Tichi sect. Most of the swordsmen of Kunlun's field were gathered in the sword pavilion. Any small thing that happened today would become the topic of discussion of all monks in the world later. How would Bu Chen live after being humiliated by Shaolin like this? Veins bulged on his forehead as he uttered, You've just become an heir and you're already so arrogant. If I knew this, I wouldn't have taken that hit for you on the Void World battleground. Whoosh. The ancient sword on Bu Chen's back flew out of its sheath by itself. With light trailing after it, it flew towards Shaolin. A burst of sword chi spread out, forming a 90-foot wide 8-trigram print. It spun quickly with the sword, shaking the air violently. Shaolin had long disliked Bu Chen. Huffing, he muttered to himself, "He thinks he can call me a junior just because he's older. He doesn't even take his own abilities into consideration." Activating a technique, he disappeared from the spot with a whoosh. The next moment, he actually passed through the 8-trigram print to appear before Bu Chen. Bu Chen's expression changed. He'd never imagined that Shaolin's cultivation would be so terrifyingly high. He was so fast that Bu Chen couldn't even see his moves clearly. Boom! Shaolin punched Bu Chen's chest squarely. With the sound of bones cracking, Bu Chen's body arched and he flew back. He landed hundreds of feet away, blood pouring out of his lips. Many of his ribs had shattered and his lungs were greatly injured. This might leave an untreatable ailment. Shaolin massaged his fists and looked at Bu Chen with disdain. "With your abilities, I can kill you without even taking out my sword. However, seeing as you've taken a hit for me before, I'll spare your life. The next time you offend me, it won't be like this." "You," with a cough, Bu Chen spat out blood again. Then his vision went black. He'd lost consciousness. Seeing this, everyone exchanged glances awkwardly. The younger monks inhaled sharply. Bu Chen was already a top king, but he couldn't even take one of Shaolin's punches. The thought of this huge difference made everyone feel reverence. After drinking the holy spring, the 9 heirs have become undefeatable in their own realm. No one can compete with them anymore. From now on, only heirs can defeat heirs. Shaolin used the 7-star diversion skill from the Four Symbols sect. His speed has surpassed some half-saints. Even most of the 9 heirs are probably unable to match his speed. All the young monks of the Tichi sect, the Yin and Yang sect, and the 8-trigram sect were flawed. A young monk of the 8-trigram monk was angered by Shaolin. He wanted to walk out, but a senior stopped him. The older swordsman naturally could see that Shaolin's ego had inflated greatly after becoming an heir. Challenging him now was the same as suicide. Shangwen Nihong of the Tichi sect stared at Shaolin in the center of the square. Chewing her lip, she said, "Sister, shall we use the Tichi starry sword formation together and fight him?" Shangwen Linglong shook her head. "Shaolin's abilities can't be compared to the past. Even if we used the formation, we probably wouldn't be able to take many of his attacks. Let's not act now. Let Gai Danjiao of the Yin and Yang sect fight with him. We will only have a chance if both sides are hurt from the fight." Everyone knew about Gai Danjiao and Shaolin's rivalry. They would definitely have a bloody fight at the Sword Technique Conference today. As expected, a brutish roar sounded at this time. It was like thunder. "Traitor, let me fight you." Gai Danjiao strode forward, leaving a trail of afterimages behind her. She appeared before Shaolin. Sizzle, sizzle. Hot flames rolled out of her like a red flood. The flames quickly piled up, forming a fire giant that was hundreds of feet tall. Seeing the fire giant, Shaolin felt extreme pressure. His entire body was red from the heat and his expression was serious. "Senior sister apprentice," he said coldly. "Today is the Sword Technique Conference. The subject is the sword, but you release your extreme yang body. Isn't this against the rules? Why should I follow the rules with a traitor like you?" Gai Danjiao extended her right arm and clenched her hand. Strands of fire poured out of her paws. She punched towards Shaolin quickly. At the same time, the fire giant also made a fist and punched down at Shaolin's head. Before the fiery fist arrived, Shaolin's skin already started popping. Bloody lines appeared as if he was about to crack. "Gai Danjiao, you really think that I'm scared of you?" Shaolin's eyes were dark. He brought his hands before his chest and holy chi spun quickly within him. The bloody lines that had formed on him healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Rosefinch sword. A martial print emerged between his brows. A blood-red sword flew out of the print and stabbed towards Gai Danjiao and the fire giant. The sword sang sharply. Various inscriptions appeared on the sword's body. It caused sword chi to gather quickly, transforming into a huge rosefinch, hundreds of feet long. It emanated with a grand aura. "This is the legendary Rosefinch sword, ranked third of the Four Symbols Divine Swords. The Four Symbols sect actually gave Shaolin the Rosefinch sword. It seems that Gai Danjiao will definitely lose now. Gai Danjiao is more skilled than Shaolin, but her Tao of the Sword is far from him. Even if she had the Sky Sword or Earth Sword from the Yin and Yang sect, she probably still wouldn't be able to turn the tides. Seeing the Rosefinch apparition on the surface of the sword, the countless swordsmen outside the sword pavilion were also shocked. The Four Symbols Divine Swords were the top treasures of the Four Symbols sect. Each one contained boundless power. Shaolin's Rosefinch sword could redouble someone's power. Even a half-saint would want to avoid fighting directly with him. Boom! Gai Tanjiao's extreme yang body was broken by the Rosefinch sword instantly. It transformed into strands of flames that scattered in all directions. Cold murderous desire shone in Shaolin's eyes. He charged forward and hit the Rosefinch sword's hilt. The sword flew towards Gai Danjiao's chest with renewed speed.